We're back today and we're gonna be meal prepping in the kitchen. Since the weather has changed and it's cold outside and it actually might snow this week, I wanna make some soups because I just wanna feel cozy and warm and have something in my belly to warm it up when I'm outside. And this time of year, a lot of people are requesting keto soup recipes. I've been seeing them all over Facebook. By the way, if you wanna join my Facebook group, it's called The Best Keto Recipes. I'll have it linked down below. It's where I share some of my favorite keto recipes and others are invited to come on too and share a lot of their favorite keto recipes that they found. So before we get started on these awesome keto soup recipes that I know a lot of us have been craving, let me just first say make sure you subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell down below so you get notified every time I post a new recipe. Now I'm excited to get started on these soup recipes, and it's one of my favorite things to meal prep this time of year because you could actually make up a large batch of it and then heat it up when you want to eat it. So you can make it up on Sunday and then throughout the week just heat it up as you go. Plus, these 3 soup recipes are very easy to make. I have one that's going to be made in the Instant Pot and the other 2 are going to be made in the stovetop, but there are different directions there if you want to put them in a slow cooker or the Instant Pot as well. So let's get started on our first recipe. Our first recipe, we're gonna start with the Instant Pot because we're gonna be making a bone broth soup. I'm gonna be making a Vietnamese beef pho. It's a keto version, so it's low carb. There's no rice noodles in it. We have a substitute in there. Plus, we're gonna be using some lower carb vegetables. But like all phos, it does start with bone broth. And the quickest way to do that is in the Instant Pot. To start with my pho, I'm gonna first slice up this onion. Now I'm not gonna use this entire thing just because I don't want that many carbohydrates in it. It's most of the onion's gonna be used inside the broth and I will strain them out after the broth is done. It'll just be there for flavor. I am gonna save probably around like a quarter of it just to thinly slice it up. That will go in our soup after the soup is finished. So I just wanna do some large chunks. This will go in the soup and then like I said, a quarter of it is gonna be saved. Actually, I think I'm gonna save some of this because I'm gonna use some of this for my other recipes for the soup because onion provides so much flavor when you're making soup. So these big chunks of onion are gonna go straight into the Instant Pot. And now for my bones, I'm making a beef pho soup, so I'm gonna be using beef soup bones. If you were making chicken pho, you could use chicken bones instead, like chicken feet. It makes really, really good chicken stock, so you could do that. I'm going to just be using the bones to make the broth, and then I'm going to take out the bones afterwards. There are some chunks of meat on here. You could reserve it if you wanted to, but I'm just going to cook this with the bones in and then take the bones out. And I tried to thaw these out, but they are still a little frozen. That's okay. Since we're pressure cooking it, it doesn't matter. It can go straight in as a solid frozen mass. Next, we're gonna need our water. So I'm gonna need around probably like 64 ounces of water. So a lot of water since this is gonna be our broth for our soup. Now, pho is a Vietnamese broth soup, like I said. So it's bone broth, so we got the bones in there. I got some onion for flavoring. Next, what goes in there is some seasoning. So traditionally, pho has a lot of like herbs type seasonings, and they'll have like ginger, cinnamon, anise, star of anise, and then cloves. So it has those flavors going in there, so that's what I'm gonna add next. Oh, but before I do that, we're gonna add a little bit of fish sauce because it's not pho without some delicious fish sauce. I don't know if you guys have ever tried fish sauce before or smelt it. It's really, really gross smelling, but it provides a ton of flavor in any of your dishes. Next, I have around, this is about 4 inches of ginger that I'm gonna just slice up, and this is gonna get thrown in there. If you didn't have whole ginger, if you didn't have fresh ginger, you could actually use ginger powder. I've done that before. It works just fine. So probably about like 1 teaspoon of ginger powder would be fine, or maybe even 2. You're also gonna need to add a cinnamon stick. Once again, you could use powdered cinnamon if you didn't have a whole cinnamon stick. And then 4 to 6 whole cloves. Oops, I want it in the broth. Let's do 5. husband likes the soup, but he's not really a fan of like savory dishes that have like cinnamon and cloves in it. The anise, I use that a lot for when I actually make spaghetti. I'll put some anise in there. He doesn't mind that, but he just doesn't want it overpowering. So I usually try and not to put too much in there. So about like 4 stars in here. I think that was 4. Save these. And if you're curious of where to get the anise, I get it actually in the Mexican section of the grocery store. And then about a teaspoon of whole peppercorns. I always put whole peppercorns into my bone broth when I'm making it, just because it adds a lot more flavor. And then we'll need a tablespoon of salt too. And I know you're probably thinking like, oh my God, tablespoon, that's a lot. It's actually not a lot. I've tried it before with just a teaspoon, and then I had to add a lot of salt back in. I mean, if you're thinking like, man, this is gonna be super salty, you could just probably do 2 teaspoons and get away with it, but I'll tell you right now, 1 teaspoon is not enough salt. So this is our broth. I have everything in here. Where I'm gonna turn on my pressure cooker. We're gonna pressure cook this on high for about 1.5 hours. Meanwhile, I'm gonna move on to my next recipe, which is gonna be an Italian beef stew. And this I'm gonna be cooking on the stovetop, but I will have directions on how to cook it in a slow cooker or an Instant Pot down below. And I wanna stop us for a minute and take time to thank our sponsor for the video. Today's sponsor is Built Bars. I know I've talked about them before. They are a keto-friendly protein bar, and they come in all different types of flavors. I'm amazed by how many flavors they have. There really is a flavor for everybody. And the other thing I like about them, they're keto-friendly, but they're also made with real chocolate too. So there's good ingredients going in here. They have a wide range of other items on their website, so make sure you guys check them out. I'll have a link down below that you can click on, so you could save 20% off your order if you click on my link, and give them a whirl because I like them. Like I said before, I like to have them like post-workout because they're a protein bar. There's lots of protein in them. You can actually have it as a meal replacement too, if you're just kind of on the go and need to get something really quick. This stew is going to be pretty easy, and it will simmer on the stovetop for a while, so I want to get it started. And it only involves like a few ingredients. And as you can see, I will be using some carrots, but don't freak out. I think carrots are fine on the keto diet. They're filled with lots of nutrition and fiber, and they're okay if you just have a little bit. So I have like actually this is less than 2 ounces of carrots, but my recipe calls for 2 ounces of carrots, which is going to be, I think it's like 2 something net carbs for the entire dish. So don't worry about the carrots. I like them. They're there for flavor and for color. So to get started, I'm gonna chop up some of my vegetables, and then we're going to saute them in my stock pot. So let's start with some celery. I'm just gonna do a rough chop through some of the celery. And then some onion. So this was part of the onion that we saved from the last recipe, but I'm gonna dice this up into finer chunks without cutting myself. Don't make fun of my knife skills. And then let's get these baby carrots going too. All I had was baby carrots because my kids eat baby carrots. But if you have regular carrots, that'd probably be better. All right, I'm gonna throw these in my stock pot now just to get them softened. And down in here, I'm gonna add a couple of tablespoons of olive oil. And I usually don't want to overcook my vegetables too much because I don't want them to be a super soggy mess in the soup. One trick when you're making soup, you could always save part of your vegetables so that you get the flavor as it's cooking in the broth and the soup, but then you save some of them to add a little bit towards the end, just so you're not having completely mushy vegetables in there. But I do want some of these flavors to release, so that's why I'm gonna cook them, sauteing them first. While that's cooking, I am going to season my stew meat. So this is beef stew chunks here, and I'm just gonna season it with a little bit of salt and pepper. I'm gonna do this side first, and then I will add some more seasoning when I put them in the pot. All right, this looks good. I'm gonna remove these vegetables out of here and then add my stew meat in. I removed the vegetables. Now I'm gonna add in just a little bit more olive oil because I don't want my pot to get too dry. And then we're gonna add in these chunks of stew meat. And I think I'm gonna work in batches. You don't wanna crowd your pot with too much meat because then it's gonna steam instead of sear. So you want this on the highest heat just so that everything gets nice and brown. I'm gonna cook it, not touch it for a few minutes because I wanna build up that nice crust layer. And then I will kind of just turn them and flip them over after that. The purpose of searing your meat when you're making a stew is that it just really locks that flavor and moisture inside each chunk of meat. If you were just to like add your meat straight to your soup, it just might lose some of its moisture and sometimes it can be tough and not have quite as much flavor. So this definitely adds a little bit more flavor to your stew. And you don't have to flip these over one by one. I don't know why I'm doing that. If I was just cooking just to cook, I would probably just be in here like this. But for you guys, I wanted to make sure everything got seared correctly. So I'm on my last batch of meat. Next step is to add everything back into the pot. Along with some mushrooms, because it is an Italian soup. I like to add mushrooms to anything Italian. And then of course we need lots of garlic. So I've chopped up 6 cloves of garlic. That's gonna go in here. And if you guys want to know where I got this, I'll have it linked down below. It's the Worcester. It's their herb chopper. I use it for garlic, jalapenos, and herbs. I love it. So we're gonna mix this all together, get that garlic nice and fragrant. I can smell it now. It smells so good. Okay, next step is let's add a little bit of thickener. So I'm gonna use some almond flour this time. You could use, well, I don't really like coconut flour as a thickener, but you could. I also like to use arrowroot powder as a thickener as well. So stir that for about 20 seconds or so. And then just to help get up any of these like brown bits that might be on the bottom, we're gonna add some wine. Now, this little mini bottle of wine came from an advent calendar I had over the holidays where I got like a little mini bottle every day, and like this is a lot of wine. I think maybe it is supposed to be a glass, but I can't drink that all every single day. So I'm gonna add like maybe around like a half a cup of wine. I love wine in soups regardless. I think it really helps with the flavor, and it's gonna help us get up any of those brown bits that we have stuck to the bottom too. It's called deglazing your pan. If you don't want to add wine, don't worry about it. Just throw in your chicken stock. And I used white wine. A dry white wine works best. I think that's a Chardonnay though. But red wine also is delicious. Red wine usually would go good with beef regardless. So that would work too. And you can see it's already kind of thickened up a bit. Now we're gonna add in our chicken stock. You could use beef stock if you wanted to, but a lot of times when it comes to cooking, chicken stock is so versatile. You could use it in chicken recipes, vegetable recipes, and beef recipes too. Whereas beef is usually just more for like a beef stew or a beef recipe. So I actually have turkey stock left over, so I'm gonna add that to here. So this is my turkey stock. It's still kind of frozen in here, so we'll see if we can dig it out. I like to make my own stock most of the time. I will buy some too. I like to make it with any leftover bones or chicken feet that I might have. I'll have a recipe linked down below for you guys, or just click up here and watch this video on how to make it. I make it in the slow cooker. It's super easy. And then I store it in mason jars and freeze it. And I've never, I think maybe like one time I had a glass break on me. Most of the time, it's fine. You just don't want to overfill it, and you want to make sure that it's cooled before you pop it into the refrigerator or freezer. But you can see like there's just tons of delicious fat on top, and it's super gelatinous too, so you know it has some good high quality nutrition in it. So I'm gonna dig in here, and I am gonna add a little bit of this fat to here. And you want a cup and a half of broth, and this is just completely slushy broth right now, so I am gonna just eyeball it. But you want like a cup and a half of broth, because we are gonna be adding some tomatoes, like a can of tomatoes, and that will provide some liquid too. So we don't need too much liquid, but with soup you really can't go wrong. Like you can add more liquid if you want to, especially if you want to make a larger batch. So this is probably like the slowest way possible that I could do this. Just scoop by scoop, but that's how I operate. I don't know, is that a cup and a half? Kind of looks like it. Okay, so let's just mix this in here. Man, it smells like heaven. I love soup, especially for lunches. I love soup for lunch too. Okay, so that is our chicken stock going in there, and then the next step is to add in the diced tomatoes. It is an Italian soup, so you do need to have some sort of tomato base in here. If you didn't have diced tomatoes, you could use crushed tomatoes. You could even just add some tomato sauce or a little bit of tomato paste. It will give you the same flavor. I'm also gonna add in 2 bay leaves. We're gonna heat this up to a boil, and then we're gonna pop it in the oven to continue to cook for about an hour and a half, and it will be a 300-degree oven. Before we move on to the next recipe, I just wanted to introduce you guys to our new puppy. This is Whiskey. He is 11 weeks old now. He's a English lab, purebred, and he's adorable. We've always had labs, my husband and I. We had 2 black labs before that both actually passed this year, which was sad. So my husband surprised me with a Christmas puppy, and this guy is just a lover, as you can see. So he's just chilling down next to me while I cook today. My last soup recipe that I want to make for you guys is my chicken and dumplings soup. So this is a low carb chicken and dumplings. I've made this for you before. I'll have it linked up here for you guys to click if you want to watch the full video, detailed video on how to make it. And I'll also have it down below in the description box too. This is a very, very simple soup because I use a couple of shortcuts. You don't have to do that. You could actually cook this whole thing from scratch, but I am using a store-bought shredded chicken. Like I said, you could buy just regular raw chicken and then cook it up ahead of time, or just let it boil in your soup and then shred it. And then normally in my recipe, I use like pre-packaged broth. But like I said, we have that bone broth that I have and I need to use up, so that's gonna go in there too. So the benefit of using actual chicken broth or bone broth in this soup is that you don't have to cook it for as long, basically. It only takes like a few minutes, 20 minutes or so, just to simmer to get those flavors going with the vegetables and the chicken. So it's not gonna take quite as long to cook through. So it's one of those things that you could make on a busy weeknight if you need something warm in your belly, like a soup. So to get started, I'm gonna start by chopping up my vegetables. So I have 4 stalks of celery here. So we're gonna chop through that. And instead of olive oil, I'm gonna use butter, just because I think it adds a little bit more yummy flavor. So I have 4 tablespoons of butter going in there. I almost said olive oil. And then I'm gonna add in my celery. I'm also gonna use half of an onion. And then some carrots for color and a little bit of flavor. So that's only about like a 1/4 cup of carrots going in there. I'm gonna stir this together. Now my recipe actually calls for leek, which is like a cousin to the onion family. I love the flavor of leeks in stews and soups. It is higher in carbs though. So today, just because we're back on it, it's New Year, I'm watching my carb count, so I'm not gonna add the leek into the soup, but feel free to add it in if you love the taste of leeks like I do. The other vegetable that's going in here is some zucchini. So I'm just gonna half moon these and give them a good slice. You could also add some, because I did buy a lot of mushrooms, you could really add whatever vegetable you want to into your soup. So whether that's, mushrooms, if you have any like cauliflower or broccoli, you could add those to any of these soups. So soup is a great way to use up like leftover vegetables that look like they're gonna go bad. Even stuff like, you could add in lettuce to your soup if you wanted to, or kale. So just add it in at the end. Okay, my vegetables look like they've softened enough. I'm gonna add in my shredded chicken. So you want around 3 cups of shredded chicken. When I made this recipe before on my YouTube channel, I just got a rotisserie chicken and then shredded it up and put it in there. But I actually this time got some pre-shredded chicken from Fred Meyer. So that's gonna go in here. I think that's around 3 cups. It's okay if it's a little bit more, it's not gonna hurt anything. You would just have to adjust your macros if you are seriously counting every single macro. These are like some serious chunks, like they did not do a good job of shredding this chicken. So I'm gonna have to cut it. So nobody wants like half of a breast when they're trying to eat some soup. All right, that's a little bit better. Okay, next we add in our chicken broth. So once again, I'm gonna be using that leftover turkey stock. I'm gonna add the rest of this thing, see if this will come out. It's still kind of frozen. This will be good because it will get that nice, yummy fat in there too. There we go. Man, I seriously Like, soup tastes so much better when you use bone broth, especially homemade bone broth. So I highly recommend you guys start making your own bone broth. It's so easy to make. Even if you can't get a hold of like a turkey or chicken carcass or chicken feet, just use like, buy some bone-in chicken. Just buy some like drums or chicken wings and put that in your slow cooker. And then you can save the meat too and shred it up and use it for something else. Okay, so I think that's enough broth. I might have to add a little bit more liquid, but it might be fine. It might just be fine. Okay, so we are gonna heat this up. We're gonna bring it to a boil, and then I'll reduce it to a simmer as well. And then while the broth is simmering and all those flavors are combining, I'm gonna be making up the dumplings to go on top. Moving on to the dumplings, I'm gonna add just a few simple ingredients. These dumplings are super easy to make, so you can make them while your broth is simmering. We're gonna start with a cup of almond flour. And then you'll also need a half of a cup of unflavored whey protein powder. And a couple of people have asked me if collagen works. I actually haven't tried that yet. I really don't think it's gonna work though. So you have to stick with just the protein powder. And then you'll need some xanthan gum. So this is a teaspoon of xanthan gum. Xanthan gum is used for structure and support in the recipe. And then some baking powder just to get them to rise. So that's a teaspoon and a quarter of baking powder. And then a half a teaspoon of salt for some flavor, and then a quarter teaspoon of onion powder. And if you don't have onion powder, that's fine. You don't have to add it in. Garlic powder would be fine though. I think that would be tasty in these. It just gives it kind of like that savory, yummy element to it. So I'm gonna stir that just to get all my dry ingredients mixed together. And then we're gonna add in a half of a cup of boiling hot water. See it just kind of start to bubble up and foam up. And then I'm just gonna mix it together with a spatula until everything's combined and the dry ingredients have absorbed the wet ingredients. And this is gonna be a super sticky mixture. So I highly recommend when you go to grab and form your dumplings, make sure your hands are wet or they need to be like greased with some oil or something like that. So this looks like it's about done. I did want to say one of the common mistakes people make when they're making my recipe for chicken and dumplings is that when they go to add the dumplings into the soup or into the broth, they say that the dumplings dissolve, and that's because their broth is too hot. So remember, in the instructions down below, I have the link to it. It says you're gonna boil it, then you're gonna kill the heat to a simmer. You could even remove it at this point too when you go to put the dumplings in, just to make sure that they're not gonna disintegrate or dissolve, because the hot boiling water is gonna cause them to kind of disintegrate a little bit or dissolve. But if your if your broth is more cooler, or it's been sitting out and it's just cooling, you've removed it from the heat, or you're at like a simmer, it all depends on like stovetop temperature, then they're gonna stay intact and that won't happen. All right, so with some wet hands, I'm just gonna scoop up a little bit of my dough and just kind of form a dumpling, whatever size you want, and you're just gonna gently drop it on top. And do that with the rest of them. You just kind of spread it around evenly, and you'll notice it starts to stick to your hands. That's when I go and I wet my hands again. So basically, you want these dumplings to steam. So the hot broth is gonna cook them from underneath, and we're gonna cover this with the lid and just let it sit there for several minutes, like 10 minutes or so. And then that steam from the broth is gonna just help cook them all around and help steam them. My beef broth from my pho is finished pressure cooking. You do wanna let it release for around 15 minutes for natural pressure before releasing the rest of the pressure manually by pressing down the vent button or just turning it until it's venting. And then once all the pressure has been released, I'm gonna strain out the bones and the onions and stuff, and all like the star of anise and whole cloves and all that kind of stuff. Whatever you can, you wanna strain that out so you're just left with broth. And then the fun thing about Pho is that you could add all of your vegetables on top. So you have your base, which is your soup, and this is how it's such a great meal prep recipe. So you make up a ton of broth, and then when you go to serve it, then you just add your vegetables. You heat up your broth first, of course, so that it's nice and warm and it will actually cook your vegetables. But you're gonna thinly slice up your vegetables into the thinnest possible chunks so that they'll cook in that hot broth. And I'm also gonna be using some thinly sliced beef too in here, just because it is a beef pho. Chicken works as well, or you can just do a straight vegetarian one. And then for the noodles, I'm using Hearts of Palm noodles. And I'll have a link down below on where you could purchase those. I hope you guys enjoyed watching these 3 soup recipes as I make them. Make sure you let me know if you actually end up making any of these delicious soups that you can meal prep. And let me know down in the comments what your favorite soup is and what you want to see me make in the future when it comes to keto soup. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and make sure you hit the notification bell down below so you get notified every time I post a new recipe. We'll see you next time. Bye.